There's a place in the high country where the wind doesn't whistle, it talks. My grandfather told me that once and I laughed at him. I was 9. He wasn't laughing. Years later, I stood at the broken gate of the Hollies Ranch, listening to that wind move through a house everyone swore had been empty for a decade, and I understood exactly what he meant. Because the wind was saying something, and someone up there in the dark was answering it. What I'm about to tell you isn't the kind of story I share at the feed store or around a fire. It's the kind I kept in a notebook for 3 winters, because I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it smaller than it was. But I'm older now, and I've learned that the things we don't say are the ones that rot us from the inside. So I'm going to tell you about the man who walked down off that mountain, the one no one believed existed, and what he taught a stubborn, frightened rancher about the difference between surviving and living. Stay with me to the end. There's a moment near the close of all this that I still can't explain, and I think you'll feel it too. The first thing I noticed was the smoke. It was October, the kind of October that bites before it warms, and I was riding the north fence line of my own property when I saw it, a thin gray thread rising over the ridge, climbing up out of the holly's place like something breathing. I pulled Dutch to a stop. My horse's ears swiveled forward. He felt it too, that wrongness, the way an animal knows when a thing has changed in its territory. Nobody lived on the Hollies Ranch, hadn't for years. I want to be honest about what I knew, which wasn't much. The Hollies family had run cattle on that land for 3 generations, and then old Walt Hollies died and his kids scattered like seed in a hard wind, one to Phoenix, one to somewhere in Oregon, one who just stopped answering letters altogether. The bank took half of it. The other half sat in some tangle of inheritance and back taxes that no court seemed willing to untie. The house went dark. The corrals collapsed. Coyotes denned under the porch. Every spring I told myself I should ride over and check the water tanks, and every spring I found a reason not to, because the truth is that empty places frighten me more than I like to admit. There's a silence in an abandoned home that feels like an accusation. But there was smoke now, and smoke means fire, and fire means hands, and hands mean a person. I sat on Dutch for a long time, fidgeting with the reins the way I do when I'm thinking, looping them, unlooping them, a nervous habit my late wife used to swat my hands for. "You'll wear the leather through," she'd say. I wore a lot of leather through after she passed. I should have ridden home, minded my own land. That's what a sensible man does. Instead, I went toward the smoke. The road into the Hollies' place was barely a road anymore. 12 years of neglect had let the sage crowd in until the ruts were just a suggestion, 2 pale lines through silver-green brush, and Dutch picked his way down with his head low and careful. The closer I got, the more the back of my neck prickled. Magpies scattered out of a dead cottonwood. Somewhere a windmill turned with a slow metal shriek that hadn't been oiled in a decade, creak, creak, creak. And under it, faint, I heard something I couldn't place at first. Chopping, the steady, patient thok of an axe biting wood. I came around the last bend and the house rose up in front of me, and I reined in hard. It was changed. That's the only word. The Hollies' house I remembered was a corpse, windows like knocked-out teeth, porch sagging into the dirt, paint peeled down to gray bone. This was still a poor house, still a wounded one, but someone had been working it. The broken windows were boarded with new-cut planks. A length of porch railing had been spliced back together with rope and raw timber. There was a garden plot turned over in the side yard, the soil black and wet and combed into rows, and a deer hide stretched on a frame near the woodpile. And the woodpile itself, that's what stopped me. The woodpile was enormous, taller than a man, split and stacked with the kind of obsessive care that only comes from someone who has known what it is to be cold and sworn never to be cold again. And there at the chopping block stood the man. He was big, not fat-built, the way a granite outcrop is built, all shoulders and forearms, a chest like a barrel under a buckskin coat gone shiny with grease and age. His beard came down past his collarbone, gray shot through black, and his hair was tied back with a strip of leather. He had an axe in his hands and a split of pine at his feet, and he had clearly heard me coming a long while ago, because he wasn't startled at all. He just straightened up slow and looked at me across 40 yards of dead grass. We stared at each other. "This is private land," he said. His voice was low and rough and didn't carry the way you'd expect from a man that size. It was almost soft, like he'd gotten out of the habit of speaking and was finding the words one at a time. "I know it," I said. "I'm your neighbor, Tom Reese. My place borders yours on the north." I paused. My hands were doing the thing with the reins again. "Reckon this house was empty." "It was," he said. "Now it ain't." That was the whole of it. It was. Now it ain't. He turned back to his wood as if I'd already left, set another split on the block, and brought the axe down thock clean through, the halves jumping apart and tumbling into the dirt. I should have ridden off then too, but I didn't. I sat there like a fool, watching a stranger split firewood on a dead man's ranch, and what kept me wasn't curiosity exactly. It was something closer to recognition. The way he moved, careful, economical, like every motion cost him something he was rationing. I knew that. I'd moved like that the year after Sarah died, like a man trying not to spill himself. "You buy the place?" I asked. The axe stopped halfway up. He held it there a moment, then lowered it and looked at me again, and something passed across his face that I'd come to understand much later but couldn't read then. Not guilt, closer to grief. "No," he said, "didn't buy it." "Then how'd you come to?" "You ask a lot of questions for a man on someone else's road." He was right, and I felt the heat come up my neck. I tipped my hat, said something stupid about being neighborly, and turned Dutch around. But just as I did, I caught sight of the thing I'd see again and again in the weeks to come, the detail that told me this man was not what he first appeared. Pinned to the doorframe of the house, fluttering in the cold wind, was a child's drawing. Crayon on butcher paper. A house, a sun with rays like spider legs, and 3 stick figures holding hands. The paper was sun-faded and rain-curled and old, but someone had pinned it up new, smoothing the corners flat, the way you handle a thing that matters more than it should. A man like that, a mountain of a man, hard as winter, does not pin up a child's drawing for no reason. I rode home with that picture stuck in my mind like a splinter. I didn't go back for a week. I told myself I was busy, and I had a sick heifer and a stretch of fence the elk had flattened, but the truth is the man unsettled me. There was a story on that ranch, and I could feel the weight of it, and at 58 years old, having buried a wife and outlived most of what I'd planned for my life, I had developed a healthy fear of other people's grief. It's contagious. You start carrying someone else's, and pretty soon you can't tell whose sorrow you're hauling around. But the second week, the temperature dropped hard. A front came down off the divide, and the thermometer on my porch read 4 degrees one morning, and I lay in bed listening to the wind talk. There's my grandfather again. And I thought about a man in a half-broke house with a child's drawing on the door and no neighbor for 9 miles in any direction. And I got up and made a pot of coffee and a second pot to carry, and I saddled Dutch in the dark. It's a foolish thing, what I did. I want to be clear about that. A sensible man does not ride out at dawn in killing cold to bring coffee to a stranger who told him plainly to leave. But I have never been entirely sensible. And the year you lose your wife is the year you learn that the things which save you are almost never sensible. When I came down the road the second time, I saw something I hadn't the first. The man was on the ground. He was kneeling, no, fallen beside the woodpile, one hand braced in the snow that had come overnight, his big shoulders heaving. For one terrible second I thought he was dying, a heart attack maybe, and I kicked Dutch into a run and was off the horse before he'd fully stopped. But as I got close I saw it wasn't his heart. It was his leg. His pant leg was dark and wet, and there was a long, ugly tear in it, and below it the meat of his calf was opened up where the axe must have glanced wrong, and he'd been trying, I saw the rags, the strip of his own shirt. He'd been trying to bind it himself, and his hands were shaking too hard from cold and blood lost to tie the knot. "Easy," I said, dropping down beside him. "Easy now, I've got it." He looked at me. His eyes were pale, almost gray, and they were full of a kind of fury I recognized not at me, at his own body, at its betrayal. A man who has built his whole life around being strong does not forgive himself easily for needing help. "Don't," he said, "don't need. You're bleeding into the snow, friend. Pride's a luxury and you're fresh out." I got the rag around his calf and cinched it down hard, and he made a sound through his teeth but didn't cry out, and I felt the muscle of his leg go rigid as iron under my hands. "How long you been down here?" "Since before light." "That's hours." "I know how long it's been," he said, and there was the ghost of something dry in it, almost humor. "I know how long it's been." As if time was the one thing he had too much of. I got him up. It took everything I had, and I'm not a small man, but he leaned on me, and we hauled him up the steps and through the door. And that's how I came to be inside the Holly's house for the first time in 12 years. I don't know what I expected. Squalor, maybe. The den of a man gone wild. What I found was the opposite, and it broke something open in me. The house was poor. There's no other word. The floors were swept dirt in 2 of the rooms and the windows were boarded, and the only heat came from a cast iron stove he'd scavenged from somewhere and patched with stovepipe wire. But it was cared for. It was a home being built by a man with nothing but his hands and his will. Pots scoured clean and hung in order of size. A row of jars on a plank shelf, dried herbs, wild onion, what looked like rose hips. A bed in the corner made up tight as a soldier's, a wool blanket folded square at the foot. Books, a surprising number of books stacked along one wall, swollen with damp but stacked anyway, spines out, alphabetized. And on the wall above the bed, more drawings. The child's drawings, a dozen of them. Suns and houses and stick figures, and one, I'll never forget this one, of a big man and a small girl. The man drawn enormous and the girl up on his shoulders with her crayon arms thrown wide like she was flying. I got him onto the bed and got the stove roaring and got hot coffee into him. And the whole time I didn't say anything about the drawings, because some things you don't ask, you wait. I cleaned the wound as best I could with the boiled water and the iodine I keep in my saddlebag. And I'm no doctor, but I've stitched enough livestock to know a bad cut from a killing one. And his was bad but not killing, deep but clean, and I told him so. "You'll keep the leg," I said, "but you need a doctor. There's one in town can." "No town, flat final, no doctor." I sat back on my heels and looked at him. "Mister, I don't even know your name." He was quiet a long time. The stove ticked. Outside the wind talked and talked. "Eli," he said finally, "Eli Vance." "Well, Eli Vance, you're going to lose this leg to infection if you don't get proper care, and then you'll lose the rest of you not long after, alone out here. So you can tell me why no town and no doctor, or you can be a stubborn dead man. Your choice. But I drank one of these cups of coffee already and I'm not in a hurry." And Eli Vance, mountain of a man, hard as the country that made him, closed his pale eyes, and when he opened them they were wet, and he told me. He'd had a daughter. Her name was Maddie and she was 6, and the drawings were hers, and the reason he'd come to the Hollies ranch, the reason he could not go to town, would not see a doctor, would not file a claim or sign a paper or let his name be written in any book that the world might read, was that 12 years ago his daughter had died in a county hospital 80 miles east of here, of a fever the doctors caught too late, and Eli Vance had been holding her hand when she went. And somewhere in the gray country of that grief, he had decided that the world of towns and doctors and papers and law had taken the only thing he loved, and he would never again ask it for anything. So he'd gone up, into the mountains. He'd lived 12 years in the high country, trapping and hunting and reading the books he carried up in waterproof bags, talking to no one, a ghost the local hunters whispered about and didn't believe in. The mountain man, a campfire story, a thing you saw at the edge of the trees and told yourself was a bear. And this fall, his body finally starting to fail him, the cold getting into his joints, his hands not as sure as they were, he had come down. Not all the way down, just to the edge. To a dead ranch where no one would bother him, where he could put a roof over his head for what he figured were his last winters, and where, when he found old Walt Hollies' grandchildren had left behind a box of a little girl's drawings in the attic, left them behind the way people leave the things too painful to carry, he had pinned them up. Because they were the right age, because they were the right size. Because for 12 years he had not let himself look at his own daughter's drawings, kept sealed in oilcloth at the bottom of his pack, and these strangers' drawings were close enough to ache and far enough to bear. "I pin 'em up," he said, his rough voice breaking on it, "so the house don't feel empty, so when I come in out of the cold there's something here that's small, something that needs the fire kept up." He looked at me, and I will carry that look to my own grave. Is that crazy? You can say it. I've wondered. "No," I said. My own throat had closed. I thought about Sarah's reading glasses, which I still kept on the nightstand on her side of the bed, folded as if she might come in any moment to find them. As if a pair of glasses could keep a house from being empty. "No, Eli, it's not crazy. It's the least crazy thing I ever heard." We sat there, two old men in a poor house at the edge of the world, and neither of us said anything for a long while. The drawings flickered in the firelight. The wind talked, and somewhere in that silence I understood that I had not come down this road twice for the smoke, or the mystery, or even out of neighborly duty. I had come because I was as alone as he was, and I had smelled it on him, the way one wounded animal smells another. I stayed until dark that day. I changed the dressing twice and left him my iodine and most of my coffee and a promise to come back in 2 days. And he didn't thank me, men like Eli don't. The words sit too heavy in their mouths. But as I was leaving, he said my name. "Reese." I turned in the doorway. He was sitting up in the made-tight bed with the firelight on his ruined leg, and his daughter's borrowed drawings above his head. And he looked at me for a long moment like a man, deciding whether to open a door he'd kept shut for 12 years. "There's another reason I came down," he said. "Off the mountain this fall." He stopped. His jaw worked. "It ain't just the cold in my joints." "What is it then?" And he told me the thing that changed everything. The thing that would, before the snow melted, pull us both into a winter neither of us would survive unchanged. But that's where I have to stop for now. Because the part that comes next I've never told anyone, and I need to tell it right. The fire ticked. Outside, the early dark had come down hard and blue over the snow, and I stood in the doorway with my hand on the frame and felt the cold reach in around me. And I waited, because I had learned in 2 visits that Eli Vance laid his words down like a man laying stones across a creek, slow, testing each one before he trusted his weight to the next. "A girl," I said. "Up on the mountain, in the old Forest Service cabin below Cathedral Rock. You know the one." I did, barely. A one-room shack maybe 4 miles up and 2,000 feet above where we stood, used by hunters in the fall and nobody at all in the winter. Because in the winter that high country is a place that kills you for the sin of being in it. "There's a girl living in it," he said. I came back inside and shut the door. I didn't sit. "How old a girl?" 16, maybe 17, won't say. He shifted his bad leg and his face went tight, then loosened. "Found her end of September. I'd gone up to pull my marten traps before the snow and I smelled smoke where there's no business being smoke, and I went to look, figuring some fool hunter, and there she was, half starved. Burning the cabin furniture and the stove a stick at a time, because she didn't know how to split wood and didn't have an axe to do it with. Running from something. People run to the mountains for 2 reasons, Eli said. To find something or to get away from something. I went up to get away. She's the same." He looked at the drawings above his bed. "I didn't ask her what. Figured she'd tell me when she trusted me, and she don't trust easy, and I don't blame her. Somebody taught her not to. You can see it on her. The way she flinches when you move sudden. I felt something cold settle in my gut that had nothing to do with the weather. I've lived a long time. I know what it means when a child flinches. So you've been, I started, then stopped. What feeding her? Twice a week. Pack up jerky beans, what I can spare. Showed her how to lay a fire that won't smoke much. Brought her my second axe and taught her to split kindling so she wouldn't burn the cabin down around herself. He said it plainly, without weight, the way a man describes chores. But I understood then what he had not said and would never say. That a man who had sworn off the entire human race, who had spent 12 years making himself into a ghost so that the world could never hurt him again, had come down off his mountain, broken his own holiest vow, because somewhere up there a frightened child needed someone to keep her fire lit. That's why he'd come to the ranch, not for himself, to be close enough. Eli, I said, my voice came out rougher than I meant. You can't keep a kid alive in a Forest Service shack through a high-country winter. You know that. The first real storm. I know what I know, he snapped, and then quieter, ashamed. I know, that's the trouble, that's the whole trouble. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, this enormous man, like a boy trying not to cry. I planned to get her down before the snow set in proper, get her to the cabin here at least, out of the worst of it. And then I went and put an axe through my own damn leg, and now I can't make the climb, and there's weather coming, Reese. I can feel it. My knees have been talking all week. There's a big one coming, and she's got maybe 3 days of food, and she does not know how to ride a storm out, and she will die up there, and I can't. His voice cracked clean in half. I can't get to her. And there it was. I have replayed this moment 1,000 times. Because everything that came after, everything, turned on what I said next, in that poor warm room, with the wind starting to rise outside like something waking up. The sensible thing, there's that word again, the sensible thing was to call the sheriff. That's what you do. There's a miner in danger on the mountain, you call the authorities. They send a search and rescue team with snowmobiles and trained men and a helicopter if the weather allows, and they bring the child down to a warm bed and a social worker and the machinery of a society built, however clumsily, to catch falling children. That is the right thing. I want to be very clear that I knew it was the right thing. I said it out loud. We need to call the sheriff, Eli. The change that came over him frightened me. He sat bolt upright despite the leg, and his pale eyes went hard and wild. And for 1 second I saw the animal that 12 years of solitude had made of him, cornered, dangerous. No, not loud, worse than loud. You bring the law up that mountain and you'll never see that girl again. They'll help her. She told me one thing. He was breathing hard. One thing the second week after I'd brought her food enough times she figured I wasn't going to hurt her. She grabbed my wrist, she's got a grip like a snare, that kid, and she looked at me and she said, if anyone comes for me, I'll run and you'll never find me and it'll be on you. You understand? She's more scared of being found than she is of dying. Somebody made her that way. And I don't know who, and I don't know what they did, but I know that a girl don't get to be that scared of rescue without a reason, and I will not be the man who hands her back to whatever she ran from. We stood there in the firelight, the two of us, and I understood that I'd walked into the middle of a thing far larger and more terrible than smoke on a ridge. I'll tell you what I did, and I'll tell you it sat wrong with me even as I did it, and it sits wrong with me still. I didn't call the sheriff. I want to defend it and I can't, not cleanly. There were 100 ways it could have gone worse for that going the way I chose. If she died up there while I played at being a rescuer, that's a thing I'd have answered for to God and the law both. I knew that. I lay awake the whole drive of that decision, turning it over, Eli's certainty against my conscience, the girl's terror against the cold arithmetic of a mountain winter, and in the end what tipped me wasn't logic. It was a memory. When Sarah was dying the last bad month, a social worker came to the house. Kind woman, meant well. And she sat at my kitchen table and explained gently all the things that were going to happen, all the systems that were going to take over, the hospice and the paperwork and the schedule of strangers. And Sarah, who could barely speak by then, reached over and gripped my wrist, just like that girl gripped Eli's, and she breathed at me, "Don't let them take me out of my house. Whatever they say, promise me." And I promised, and I kept it. She died in our bed with the window open to the smell of cut hay because I refused every sensible thing they told me, and I have never once regretted it. Some promises matter more than being right. So I looked at Eli Vance and I said, "All right, no law, but I'm going up that mountain." He stared at me. "You're 60 years old." 58, I said, "and you're worse off than me with that leg, so unless you've got a third option I'm not seeing, it's me or it's nobody, and nobody means she's dead. So," I picked my hat up off the chair, "tell me everything. The route, the cabin, what she'll do when she sees a stranger. And tell me her name, Eli. I'm not climbing a mountain in a storm to save a girl I can't even call by name." Something moved in his face. The hardness cracked, and under it was just an old man, grateful and terrified and ashamed of needing help so badly. "Junie," he said. "She calls herself Junie. I don't think it's her real name." He almost smiled. "She named the cabin Mouse, too, calls him Mr. Biscuit, feeds him crumbs she can't spare." He shook his head. "She's still a kid under all that fear. That's the thing'll break your heart. There's a kid still in there trying to take care of something smaller than herself." I thought about a child too frightened to be rescued, sharing her last food with a mouse. And I knew I'd made the only choice I could live with, right or wrong. The storm gave us a day. We spent it getting ready, which is to say I spent it working and Eli spent it suffering the particular agony of a strong man forced to watch another do what his own body won't let him. I rode home and came back with everything I owned that might matter. My heaviest coat and a spare, snowshoes, a coil of rope, a tarp, a one-burner stove and fuel, a week of food, a med kit, 2 sleeping bags rated for cold I'd never bothered testing. I packed it twice. The second time Eli made me unpack it and showed me what I'd done wrong, too much weight up high, the wrong things buried at the bottom, no quick way to the fire-making gear with frozen hands. He'd done this 1,000 times. I'd done it never. I swallowed my pride and listened, and I'm alive today because I did. "The route's not hard in good weather," he said, sketching it in the ash on the hearthstone with a stick of charcoal. "Follow the creek to the burn scar, cut east at the lightning tree, switch back up the talus to the bench and the cabins in the trees at the top of the bench. 3-4 hours up if you're fit, but it won't be good weather." He looked at me. "In the storm you won't see the lightning tree, you won't see the talus. You'll be navigating by the shape of the ground under your feet and the sound of the creek, and the creek'll be half buried and lying to you. You get above the burn scar and lose the bench. You'll walk right off the edge of it in the white, and that's 200 feet down. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Say it back." I said it back. "Creek to the burn, east at the tree, switch back to the bench, cabin in the trees." I said it until it was a song in my head. I'm saying it still some nights. "And when you get there," Eli said, and his voice changed, "you don't go busting in. You stop at the edge of the trees and you call out. You say my name first, Eli sent me. Eli's hurt, but he's alive. You say that before anything. Or she'll bolt out the back and into the storm, and that's the end of her. You got that? My name's the only key that opens that door. Eli sent me. Eli's hurt. Eli's alive." I wrote it in my notebook. I keep a notebook, have for years since Sarah. It's how I keep my head from coming apart. And I wrote it all down by the firelight while the wind got up its strength outside, and I caught Eli watching me write with a strange expression. "You always do that?" he asked. "Write things down?" "Helps me think," I said. "Helps me remember. Helps me," I shrugged. "Keeps me company, I guess. A man living alone gets to where the inside of his own head's too loud. Putting it on paper turns the volume down." Eli was quiet a moment. Then he reached under his bed, slow, wincing, and drew out a flat bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a leather thong gone stiff with age, and he held it in his big hands and looked at it for a long time. "My Maddie's drawings," he said. "The real ones, hers. I haven't untied this in 12 years. He set it on the blanket beside him without opening it. I keep thinking I will. Some night I'll have the nerve. I never do. He looked up at me and his pale eyes were wet again. You and me, Reese, we're the same animal. You keep your dead in a notebook. I keep mine in an oilcloth I can't bring myself to open, and we both pretend it's living. I didn't have anything to say to that. He was right. The wind hit the house like a fist. The drawings on the wall fluttered all at once, a dozen crayon suns trembling in the draft, and far off and high up, up where a frightened girl was sharing her dinner with a mouse named Mr. Biscuit, I imagined the first snow beginning to fall. I left before dawn. Eli walked me to the door on his ruined leg, which he had no business doing, leaning on a staff he'd carved, and at the threshold he gripped my shoulder with a hand that could have crushed it and didn't. Reese, his jaw worked, the words came hard. If it goes bad up there, if it comes down to you or her, he stopped, started again. She's 16. You understand what I'm saying. You're a good man and good men do stupid noble things, and I'm telling you now plain, if it comes to a choice, she's got the years. You let an old man's sentiment about that get you both killed, I'll never forgive you, dead or not. It won't come to that, I said. It might. Then I'll decide when I'm there, I said, and I meant it, and we both knew that was the most honest answer either of us could give. Because the truth about a morally heavy choice is that you never really make it in advance, in a warm room with the firelight on the wall. You make it in the cold, in the white, with your hands frozen and your judgment failing and a child's life in the balance, and you find out then, only then, what you're actually made of. I stepped out into the dark. The first flakes were already falling, fat and slow and almost gentle, the kind of snow that lies to you about what it intends. Behind me, the lit window of the poor warm house glowed gold against the blue-black mountain, and through it I could see the silhouette of a big broken man standing watch, and above his bed the small bright squares of borrowed drawings, and on the doorframe beside me the one he'd pinned outside. A house, a sun, 3 figures holding hands, curling now under a dusting of white. I started up toward the creek. Creek to the burn, east of the tree, switch back to the bench, cabin in the trees. By the time I reached the burn scar, I couldn't see the burn scar. By the time I should have cut east, there was no tree, no east, no anything, just a roaring gray-white nothing that had swallowed the world whole, and the wind screaming down off Cathedral Rock with a sound I'd never heard before and have never forgotten, a sound like the mountain itself had finally found its voice, and was using it to tell me, in no language I knew but understood completely, to turn back. I didn't turn back. I want to tell you it was courage. It wasn't. It was something simpler and stranger and harder to name, the same thing that had brought me down a dead man's road twice for a stranger, the same thing that had kept a promise to a dying woman against all sense. It was the refusal to live one more year as a man who kept his dead in a notebook and called it living. Somewhere above me, a child was sharing her last crumbs with a mouse because she could not bear to let one more small thing die. And I was done. I was done letting small things die. So I leaned into the white and the scream, and I climbed. The mountain tried to kill me 4 times before I reached the bench. The first was the creek. Eli warned me it would lie, and it did. I followed the sound of running water for the better part of an hour before I understood that the storm had thrown the sound around so badly that I'd been walking parallel to the creek, and then away from it, out across an open slope where the wind could get a clean run at me. I only caught the mistake because the ground under my snowshoes went wrong, too smooth, too even, and some animal part of my brain screamed that I was standing on a wind-loaded slab that wanted nothing more than to slide. I backed off at one careful step at a time, heart slamming, and found the creek again by getting down on my knees and listening with my whole body the way Eli had told me, not with my ears but with my chest, the way you feel a thing more than hear it. The second time was the cold. There's a moment in deep cold where you stop shivering and start feeling warm, and it is the most dangerous lie the body ever tells. I felt it come over me on the talus, A sweet, drowsy warmth, a voice in me saying, "Sit down a minute, just a minute, rest." I'd have died there. I know I would have. What saved me was stupid and small. I'd written the route in my notebook, and I'd promised myself I'd check it at the lightning tree, and the promise to check the notebook was so deep in me by then. A man's habits are the last thing the cold takes, that the idea of not doing it offended some stubborn clerk in the back of my skull, and I made myself stand up to dig the book out of my coat, and standing up broke the spell. I never did find the lightning tree. By then there was no tree, no shape to anything. But standing up to look for it saved my life, so in a way it was there after all. The third time and the fourth I won't tell. Some of it I don't fully remember, and some of it I remember too well, and a man my age has earned the right to keep one or two things back. But near the top of the bench, I knew it was the bench because the ground leveled and the wind changed its note, dropped lower, the way wind does when it's pouring over an edge instead of clawing up a slope. Near the top, I came to the place Eli had warned me about. The drop. The 200 feet of nothing that the white would hide until I'd already stepped into it. I knew it was close. I could feel it the way you feel an open window in a dark room. So I got down on my belly in the snow and I crawled. A 58-year-old rancher, crawling on his stomach up a mountain in a whiteout, feeling ahead with one bare frozen hand for the place where the world ended. I found it with my fingertips. The snow just stopped, curled over into space. I lay there with my hand hanging over 200 feet of nothing and the wind trying to peel me off the lip of it, and I thought, with a strange flat calm, "Sarah, if I die here, I want you to know it was for a good reason." And then I thought about how she'd have rolled her eyes at me, and that God help me that made me laugh alone on my belly on the edge of the world. A short, ugly bark of a laugh that the wind tore away the second it left me. I crawled east along the lip, toward the trees, toward the cabin. And then there were trees, actual trees, black trunks looming up out of the white, and the wind dropped to almost nothing in their lee. And through the snow I saw a square shape that was too straight to be natural, and a thread of smoke being shredded sideways off a stovepipe. And I knew I'd made it. And the relief was so total that my legs simply quit, and I went down in the snow and could not for a moment get up. I had just enough left in me to remember the most important thing. June. My voice came out as a ruin. I dragged in air that froze my lungs and tried again, louder. June. Eli sent me. Eli's hurt, but he's alive. Eli's alive. For a long, terrible moment, nothing. Just the wind in the trees. Then the cabin door opened a crack, and a thin, pale face appeared in the gap, and a voice, young, cracked, fierce with fear, called out into the storm. "Prove it. What's the mouse's name?" I almost wept. "Mr. Biscuit," I called back. "His name is Mr. Biscuit, and Eli says you feed him crumbs you can't spare. And he says there's still a kid in there trying to take care of something smaller than herself, and he was right." The door opened the rest of the way. She was so small. That's what undid me, when I finally got inside and got my eyes working in the dim. 16, 17, but small the way a child is small, swallowed up in a man's wool coat. Eli's spare, I realized. He'd given her his own coat, with a face all sharp angles and enormous wary eyes, and a way of standing that kept furniture between us at every moment. A survivor's geometry, always an exit, always a barrier, calculated so fast and so automatic that I knew it had been beaten into her young. There was a single chair, a stove, a heap of cut kindling she'd clearly made herself, lopsided and proud. And in a tin lid by the stove, 3 crumbs of cracker set out for a mouse who was nowhere in sight. "Is he going to die?" she said. Not hello, not thank you for climbing a mountain in a blizzard, straight to the only thing that mattered to her. "Eli, is he going to die?" "Not if I can help it," I said. "He cut his leg bad and he can't make the climb. He's worried sick about you. That's the only reason I'm here. He'd have come himself or died trying, you understand that. That man broke a vow he kept for 12 years because of you." Something flickered across her hard little face. She didn't believe in kindness. I could see her trying to find the angle, the trap, the price. People had taught her that everything came with a price. It took the whole rest of that day, waiting out the worst of the storm in that one-room cabin, for me to understand that the kindest thing I could do was stop trying to be kind at her and just be useful, fix the stove draft, share my food without comment, leave her the bigger portion and pretend not to. By dark, she'd stopped keeping the chair between us. By the time the wind finally began to ease, somewhere past midnight, she was asleep sitting up against the warm stove pipe, and a small gray mouse had crept out and was sitting on her knee, and she was so deep gone she didn't even know it. I didn't sleep. I kept the fire and I watched a runaway child and a mouse keep each other company, and I wrote in my notebook by stove light, and I thought about all the small things in the world that survive only because something else decides they're worth the trouble. In the morning the sky had cleared to a hard, brilliant blue, and the whole world was white and silent and new, and we started down. The descent is where it nearly went the way Eli feared. She could walk, she was tougher than her size by a mile, but she'd never used snowshoes, and the fresh snow was waist-deep in the drifts. And 4 miles down a mountain is harder than 4 miles up in some ways because gravity becomes a liar that wants to throw you down the hill faster than your legs can manage. We were maybe 2/3 down, on the steep pitch above the burn scar, when she slipped. It happened in an instant. 1 second she was beside me. The next she was sliding, snowshoes tangled, scrabbling, and below her the slope dropped away toward a band of broken rock. And I lunged and caught her wrist, that grip. I understood it now, that snare-tight grip Eli had described. She clamped onto my forearm. And then I was sliding too, both of us. And there was a moment, a real moment, no longer than a heartbeat but wide enough to fall through forever, where I understood that I could not hold us both. The slope had us. We were going toward the rocks, and I heard Eli's voice in my head, plain as if he stood beside me. If it comes to a choice, she's got the years. I made the choice. I drove my free hand and both feet into the snow, and I threw everything I had, every pound of me, every year, every ounce of stubborn refusal, into stopping her, into being the anchor she swung wide of, and I let my own body go where it would as long as hers didn't go toward the rocks. I didn't decide it like a thought. There wasn't time for a thought. My body decided it before my mind could vote, and that, I have come to believe, is the only place you ever really learn what you're made of in the half-second before thinking, when the truest thing in you simply acts. We stopped. We stopped in a heap against a half-buried stump 20 feet above the rocks, both of us alive, my shoulder wrenched and her elbow bleeding, and the breath knocked clean out of the both of us. And she lay there gasping and staring at me with those enormous eyes. And she said the thing I will carry to my grave alongside Eli's grief and Sarah's last whisper. "Why'd you do that? You don't even know me." And I said the only true thing I had. Because you're worth the trouble. You always were. Somebody should have told you that a long time ago. She started to cry. Not pretty crying. The ugly, wrenching, full-body kind that comes up out of a place that's been locked so long the doors rusted shut. And I didn't touch her, because I'd learned by then that touch frightened her. I just sat in the snow beside a weeping child on the side of a mountain and let her cry it out. And the cleared blue sky watched us both. And far below, a thin gold thread of smoke rose from a poor warm house where a broken man was waiting. But here is the thing about the world. It does not arrange itself into the shape we need. We got down. We got down off that mountain bruised, frost-nipped, half-dead with exhaustion, and we came down the dead road into the ranch yard a little after noon, and I was already calling out, "Eli, I've got her, Eli, she's safe," before we reached the door. He didn't answer. I found him in the bed where I'd left him, and the moment I saw his face I knew. I'd seen that face before, on my Sarah, on the cattle I've had to put down, on my own father. The leg had gone bad, the wound I'd cleaned with iodine and boiled water, and not nearly enough. The wound that needed a doctor I'd promised him I wouldn't bring. The leg had gone bad. The way they do, fast and silent and merciless, the infection climbing up into his blood while I was up the mountain saving the child he'd sent me for. His face was gray and slick with fever sweat, and his big chest was rising and falling too fast and too shallow, and his eyes, when they found me, were already half in another country. "You got her," he breathed. It wasn't a question, he'd heard me calling. "I got her, Eli. She's right here, she's safe." Junie made a sound I'd never heard a person make and crossed the room and dropped to her knees by the bed and took his huge fevered hand in both her small ones. This girl who flinched from every touch, gripping the hand of the only person in the world who'd shown her she was worth the trouble. And Eli Vance turned his head and looked at her, and something in his ruined face came to rest. "There she is," he murmured. "There's my Junie, look at you, you made it down." "You have to get up," she said, fierce, desperate, a child again entirely. "You have to get up, you have to teach me the rest. You said you'd teach me to read the snow, you promised." "I know," he said. "I know I did." His eyes found me over the top of her head, and he didn't ask me to break the promise. He didn't beg for a doctor, a hospital, the world he'd sworn off. He just looked at me, and there was no fear in it, only a kind of vast and weary peace, and I understood that for Eli Vance this was not a defeat. He had come down off his mountain to die. He'd told me so the first night, what I figure are my last winters. He'd known. His body had been telling him for a year, and he had used his last strength not to save himself but to break a 12-year silence for a frightened girl, and to die not alone in the snow where no one would ever know his name, but in a warm bed, in a house with smoke rising from the chimney, with a child holding his hand. "The oilcloth," he said to me, "Reese, under the bed." I got it out. The flat bundle tied with the stiff old leather thong, 12 years sealed. "Open it," he said. "I never could, you do it. I want," his breath caught. "I want to see her before I go. I've been too much a coward for too long. Open it. Let me see my girl." My hands were shaking worse than his. I untied the thong. I unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside were a child's drawings, suns with spider leg rays, a house, and the one of a big man and a small girl, the girl up on the man's shoulders with her arms thrown wide like she was flying. The same as the ones on the wall, the borrowed ones, except these were hers, these were Maddie's, and on the back of that last one, in a 6-year-old's careful crayon, it said, "Me and Daddy on the mountain." Eli looked at them for a long time. His eyes streamed. He didn't wipe them. "On the mountain," he whispered. "She always wanted me to take her up the mountain. I never did. Said she was too little, said next year." His voice broke into pieces. There wasn't a next year. And then he looked at Junie, at the living girl, the second chance, the child he had gotten up the mountain and had gotten back down, and he smiled. And I swear to you the whole room went warm with it. "But I got one up there and back," he said. "Didn't I, after all? I finally got one up the mountain and brought her home safe." Those were the last clear words he said. He held on through the night. Junie never let go of his hand, not once, not for water or food or sleep, and I didn't make her. Toward dawn his breathing changed, the way it does, and we both knew, and just before the light came up over the ridge, the wind talking low and gentle in the eaves, the way my grandfather promised it would, Eli Vance let go of the world he'd held at arm's length for 12 years and went looking for his daughter on whatever mountain comes after this one. We buried him on the bench above the ranch, where you can see both the high country he came down from and the valley he came down to. Junie and I dug it ourselves in the frozen ground over 2 hard days, and we didn't mark it with his name because he'd lived 12 years making sure the world never wrote his name in any book, and it didn't seem right to start the moment he couldn't argue. We marked it with a flat stone. And under the stone, wrapped fresh in the oilcloth, we put Maddie's drawings, all but one. Junie kept the one of the man and the girl on the mountain, pinned it up inside the house, smoothing the corners flat, the way you handle a thing that matters more than it should. She stayed. I won't pretend it was simple. There were papers eventually and questions, and a county that wanted to know who this girl was and where she'd come from and what I thought I was doing, An old widower with a half-grown stranger living on his ranch. I handled it. I'm handling it still. There are things about where Junie came from and what she ran from that I'm not going to set down here, partly because she hasn't told me all of it, and partly because some of it I have set down in my notebook, in case it's ever needed, in case anyone ever comes up that dead road looking for her. They'd have to come through me. I've made my peace with that. She's learning to read the snow. I'm teaching her what little I know, and we're learning the rest from Eli's books, the swollen damp alphabetized books along the wall, and on Sundays we ride up to the bench and sit by the flat stone and don't say much. The mouse didn't make the trip down the mountain. She cried about that harder than I expected, and then one morning there was a different mouse in the ranch house, and she named him Mr. Biscuit too, and I didn't say anything. The house isn't empty. That's the thing I keep coming back to, sitting here writing this 3 winters on. No one had lived on the Hollies ranch for years. Everyone said so. And it turned out a man was living there all along. A man the world had written off. A campfire story. A thing you saw at the edge of the trees and told yourself was a bear. And he was up there keeping a stranger's child alive with his own hands, and keeping a dead girl's drawings on the wall so the house wouldn't feel empty, and waiting, I think, without knowing he was waiting, for someone to climb a mountain in a storm and prove to him that the world he'd given up on still had 1 or 2 people in it worth the trouble. I keep his daughter's drawing on my doorframe now. The borrowed ones went under the stone with him, but the real one, me and Daddy on the mountain, that's Junie's, and she keeps it inside. And when the wind comes down off the divide, it lifts the curled corner of it and lets it fall, lifts it and lets it fall, like a small hand waving. Some nights I sit on the porch and the wind talks the way my grandfather said it would, and I listen. And I'll tell you what I've decided it's saying, after 3 winters of listening. It's saying nobody's gone, as long as somebody keeps the fire lit. I keep mine lit. Junie keeps hers. And up on the bench, under a flat, unmarked stone with the whole high country spread out below it, I like to think a man who spent 12 years alone is finally,